broadcast a lot of silence, I think that we may shock the some of the online viewers. They're talking. Like, what happened?
No results yet. You didn't turn it on.
Yeah, we're on.
Sometimes I can't find it.
Usual time lag.
Is everything all right in there, Jeremy?
Yeah, thanks for checking.
Scratching your back. Not breaking up furniture or anything.
Or you go right to his website and just click on
So how's everyone's spiritual quest going? There's a loaded question for you.
Like a drunk man who's lurching toward a cliff.
Oh, very appropriate. I like that.
Suspicious.
Very zen. It'd probably be more zen if it was a drunk man lurching maybe towards a cliff.
Could be a drunk woman too, I guess. So the question is whether there is any cliff to be lurching toward.
here.
Very good question. Is there a cliff?
Oh, there it is.
And if there is, does it look any different at all from this?
Right, exactly.
We've been recording these golden pearls of wisdom for
He's whispering through.
5 minutes. immortalizing this profundity.
So Peter, I guess what's happening with me is I'm just sort of trying to hang out with the Shakti, or what I believe is the Shakti, as much as possible, and then sort of trying to see if that's coming into sort of waking life. If I see waking life any differently.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit, little tiny things peek in every once in a while.
Uh-huh. So what's that feel like?
It's just sort of every once in a while I think, wow, this waking life is the same as looking at the Shakti. It's just more articulated, so to speak.
But what's looking at the Shakti like?
That's like looking at a big, seems like an energy buzz or something there, like a huge kind of a little bit like looking at the sun, but not as difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's what's going on for me. I mean, that's the extent of. I just try to do it as much as I can.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Laying down, standing up, as much as I can give it some time. And I hope that works through the rest of the system.
The Shakti will win.
Yeah, well, that's great.
Shakti wins.
I'm happy.
The good news is Shakti will win, the bad news is Shakti will win. And there's no bad news about it.
Yeah. It seems like the most important thing I can do right at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I was hanging out with the Shakti today and lying down, and it seemed to me that there was like this painful holding with regards to it, like as part of what was arising. Actually,
Mm-hmm.
There's all this stuff arising, then there's like this holding sort of with regard to it, or some kind of
What
like
kind of holding of what?
a stance, like some kind of a stance of like resistance or something. Like
Mm-hmm.
it seemed sort of like the root of the dissatisfaction or something
Mm-hmm.
was there, and there was a feeling like if that like that, an urge to let go of it, but also feeling like not knowing where the levers are,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah. With something like that, trying to let go of it just energizes it, because you're just playing a game. It's like a game with yourself.
Yeah.
The best thing to do when you feel that kind of a holding or something is look where it's coming from. And you'll find it's the Shakti itself doing it, and then it's a non-event.
Yeah.
So you look at the root of it, like where it's sprouting from,
Mm-hmm.
and then you'll see it's coming from the Shakti.
Right.
So it's actually not anything trying to hold on to anything. It's just like a prominence, an energetic
Yeah.
prominence of the Shakti itself, and hence it's a non-event. It does in no way departs from the Shakti. So even though it presents itself as if it was a holding or something, it isn't really. It's just a mirage of the Shakti.
Yeah.
Always just go back to the Shakti. See what's doing anything that shows up, thoughts or feelings or graspings or these subtle stances and this kind of thing. And rather than dealing with them on that level of how they're presenting themselves, look where they're coming from or what's doing them. And it will always be the Shakti, because the Shakti is what does everything.
Yeah.
And then it ceases to be a problem. It ceases to exist as a problem because it's just the Shakti doing itself.
Yeah.
And the interpretation of it as a holding or as a thought or as a whatever, it's just storyline.
Yeah.
It's like, when you go into a museum, every painting is just paint.
Right.
And oh no, this is this, and that's that. No, it's paint. You know, paint is paint. And likewise, Shakti is Shakti. And it doesn't matter if it's, oh, this Shakti is a holding, or this is a grasping. Oh, this Shakti is great clarity. This Shakti is thoughtless bliss. You know, this Shakti is, you know, it's just Shakti is Shakti.
Yeah.
And at that level, everything dissolves as relevant, because nothing is actually separate or separable from the Shakti. So sort of go to the root of it, go to the base of it, go to the origin of it, and it will cease to exist as a separate event that you need to do anything about, and will just seem to be Shakti being Shakti, rising from Shakti, dissolving into Shakti, and hence it's a non-event. It's a zero-sum game of Shakti, and the problems are gone.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it seemed to me that it was the same thing, but it also seemed like at the same time I kept making a distinction or whatever out of habit, or I was habitually focusing on it in a certain way.
Well, that's the habit, is to spin doctor these events as being something. Oh, this is a this is a that, this is a thought, this is a holding, this is a... But the problem isn't the event, the problem is the spin doctoring.
Mm-hmm.
And even the spin doctoring is itself an event which is Shakti arising.
Yeah.
So you can nip that in the bud every which way. So the event itself, go back to it, it's just Shakti, and you're interpreting it as something, go back to its source, and it's just Shakti, and then the whole thing collapses because it's a non-event.
Peter, is there a way, somehow I've been fooling around with this idea, is there a way you can just like completely dissolve your sense of self in the Shakti? Or does the Shakti eat you? Or does the thing always stay, you know, the Shakti's there and...
No, it's the same thing we were just talking about. The Shakti is you.
Right.
The Shakti is the world. The Shakti is your thoughts. It doesn't need to eat you or dissolve you. It already has.
Right.
And you are just a spin doctoring of the Shakti. The world is a spin doctoring of the Shakti. Your life and circumstances are a spin doctoring of the Shakti.
Right.
So just look at where the spin doctoring comes from, and you'll see that it in no way is different from the Shakti itself.
Right.
So you don't need to solve the problem of self, because it's not a problem, because there's no self, there's just Shakti. And yet Shakti can look like anything.
Right.
It's the nature of it. It's protean. It can look like absolutely anything. Just like a dream can look like anything.
Right.
So it can look like you. It can look like your thoughts. It can look like your life. It can look like your emotions. But when you look at each of these events, they turn out not to be actual events, because they're just presentations of this.
Right.
Made of this, existing within this, not departing from this, and collapsing back into this, to the extent there's any dynamism at all, which there isn't.
Right. So there's no, so I'm not going to disappear. When I see the Shakti, I mean, sometimes I think, well, this, whatever's seeing the Shakti, maybe that'll just dim out, or maybe I'll just sort of melt into the Shakti.
No. There's no, what's seeing the Shakti is the Shakti.
Yeah, I see, yeah. So it's pretty stable.
Yeah, nothing needs to change, because there is nothing to change, because there's nothing but the Shakti.
Right.
All we need to do is get it through our thick heads, through our sloppy karma, that there's nothing but the Shakti.
Right.
And all these things we've been calling ourselves, and these events, and our mentality, and our grasping, and our world, and all this stuff, is just fancy spin doctoring of this astounding, miraculous energy event.
Right. Yeah, well, sometimes when I stand, you know, when I'm doing some sort of standing meditation, like I used to do, now I do it because I just get tired of lying down watching the Shakti.
Yeah. So it's good to stand, it's good to move, it's good to lie. I mean, try different things, because the Shakti is not dependent upon how you approach it.
Right.
It's not delicate, it's not precious.
Yeah, because then I was trying to look, when I was standing, I was trying to look at sort of the energy in, you know, the center of my body, sort of the Chinese idea of qi, and contrasting that to the feeling of the Shakti in my head.
Sure.
or what I think is my head.
Sure.
And just looking at it in different ways, basically.
Yeah, the Shakti has infinite different flavors and different frequencies and different nuances and different harmonics, but they're all it, and they're all really mirages of it, because they don't actually exist as separate events.
So it doesn't matter if you're looking at it in your head or you're looking at it in your mid-body area.
It doesn't matter where you look. Just see what you're actually seeing.
Yeah, find
yourself,
it
see what it
wherever
is that you're
it
seeing.
is.
Unconditionally.
Right.
Like, see what you're seeing and then completely let go of thinking it is anything whatsoever, but keep seeing it.
Yeah.
And then it will reveal itself.
Right.
And what you'll find will be astounding, because it will look like exactly what it seems to look like, but will actually be completely unfindable and include everything else as well.
Yeah, well, even when I'm looking at it, like lying down, which seems the clearest for me right now.
Mm-hmm.
I can't, when that's going on, I can't really say what it is. It's just like a electric buzz or something.
Yeah. And be with it, and it will tend to open, it will tend to morph, it will tend to sort of unfold into ever new aspects of itself. And it's this, it's this, it's this, wow, who'd have thought, it's this, forever. Because there's no final version of it.
Okay.
There's no thing that it is, and yet it can present as anything.
Right.
And yet any presentation of itself that it presents, when you look at it, opens up into something else instantaneously. Always opens into something else. That's the whole path, is this opening. That's why I called my website The Open Doorway, because that's the path, is that any experience whatsoever is not a thing, it's a doorway to something else.
Right.
And of course what it's a doorway to is itself a doorway to something else, forever and ever. So the Shakti, by its very nature, has no stasis, it has no actual condition. Yeah, it may present as a condition, but if you meet that openly, it reveals itself to be something else. It opens into something else, and that something else isn't any more or less final than the first presentation. That opens into something else forever.
Right.
So it's just going through doors,
right,
to other doors, to other doors, to other doors, and there's never anything you get to. You just find doors, because that's the nature of the Shaktis. You can't pin it down. You can't say what it is. It is absolutely real. It is absolutely actual. It's absolutely present. It is absolutely explicit, and yet you can't find it.
Yeah.
You cannot find it, and that's its very nature. All of those at once, not either or, not it's present or you can't find it. It's like no. Its absolute concrete presence is its absolute unfindability.
Right. Yeah. Well, sometimes I try to hold on to it in a certain way, just because I try not to get pushed off by thoughts.
Right.
So I hold on to it the way I think it's happening.
Sure, but be gentle with that, because when you try and hold on to it, you'll tend to spin off into fantasy.
Yeah.
Into versions of it, because the very nature of it is that it's infinitely mutable and infinitely unholdable.
Right.
So when you try and hold it, you'll tend to create a static fantasy of it.
Right. Sometimes if I'm looking at it, I instead of having some thoughts keep appearing, I just sort of try to listen to, sound, or what sounds are just automatically coming in, or what sounds it's automatically making.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
And I kind of switch from my eyes.
Yeah, anyway, any mode of perception you go into is fine, but the way to be with it is absolutely hands off, absolutely open, just receptive, and yet absolutely present. So don't hold it as anything whatsoever in particular, but be absolutely present with it. Okay. Like you're at the beach. Say you're at the beach, just watching the waves roll in. You're not. It's just waves coming in. You don't know what's going to happen, and here comes another one. Here comes another one, and it's all. There's nothing happening. There's nothing gaining. There's nothing losing. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what it's going to look like. But it's always just itself opening to itself,
Yeah.
on a forever ongoing basis, and you just sit with that.
Right.
Sort of like Buddhist flotsam.
Or just flotsam, you have to wash it in. The tide brings in anything.
Tide brings it in.
Yeah. I like that hands-off idea. I mean, that seems
Yeah.
so perfect, because for so long I thought I had to do something to make
No.
something happen, and it's just the opposite. I have to.
Yeah.
I mean, when I first started looking at it, my hands are on it.
Yeah. No, for sure.
And I
This
try
is,
to get them off.
yeah. At first, the intuition is, oh, you gotta. I find it, and then I grab onto it. That's the that's commonsensical approach. But then you try and do that a few times, and you end up holding a mirage, a fantasy,
Yeah.
and you no, that's obviously deviated. So you let go and you go, oh, there it is, and you grab it again, and all of a sudden it spins off into another fantasy.
Yeah, right.
So then you learn to be gentle with it. It's a lot like being in a relationship with somebody. When it really works and when you're really clicking is when it's completely hands off.
Right.
When you're just completely like, okay, you be you and I'll be me.
Right.
You try and grab it and all of a sudden, woo! It splits off into insanity right away.
Right. Yeah. But anything that comes in is it.
Yes.
So sounds that happen to come in.
Yes. Anything that comes in is it, and anything that comes in is not what it seems to be.
Right.
Or you could say it's exactly what it seems to be, but be very, very attentive to what it's actually seeming to be,
Right.
not what you're thinking it is.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because the sound isn't really a sound when it appears.
No, sound isn't really sound.
In the Shakti, it's just the way it's
Yeah.
the way the Shakti's making it appear.
Yeah, sound is not really sound. And so be with sound and all of a sudden see, whoa, I don't know what this is. And then you're in the opening, and then you follow that, and that opens. Whatever at first you discover it's not sound, so it seems to be other than that, and that other is also an otherness, and is also an otherness, and it's always an otherness.
Right.
Never-ending otherness. Absolutely unsettling, unresolving as anything in particular.
Right. I mean, at some point then that gets translated to sort of a waking state, so to speak.
Well, the waking state is that.
That is the waking state,
the
yeah.
point is that as you become familiar with the behavior of Shakti, then you become more skilled at recognizing it. And then you notice, wow, wait a minute, I've been thinking this was something solid, and in actual fact my experience of this so-called state or condition is a never-ending morphing and indefinability, and I can never say what's happening in an instant and it's already gone.
Right, yeah.
So
Yeah.
where'd the waking state go? All of a sudden I'm calling it a waking state, and what is it that I'm calling a waking state? I can't find what I'm calling the waking state.
Yeah, right.
Put your finger on it, trying to find it. Where's this waking state?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I was thinking how could my supposedly, if I'm working or something, I think that's determinate, and looking at the Shakti kind of directly is indeterminate, but it can't be any more determinate than the basic state.
If you look honestly and openly and with presence, you cannot find determinacy.
Right.
You cannot find anything whatsoever. Anytime you think you found something, that illusion is maintained by not looking closely.
Right, yeah.
Like stability, it's like, everything's stable here, nothing's changing. To hold that feeling, you have to create it actively in your imagination because it does not exist experientially.
Right, yeah.
Your experience is...
Yeah.
Your experience, you're just surfing infinity.
Right. Yeah, I was sort of in a mood last night a little bit before I went to bed, and then I thought, well, this mood, it couldn't be that. It couldn't be what I was thinking it would be. It is.
Sure.
Because it's too complex. If it's just Shakti, I'm putting a label on it. It's just some bit of weather.
Yeah. And just look and see anything like that. Just look and see that it's other than what you're holding it to be, even subtly.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I'm in a mood, and whatever, any label. Just even calling it a mood. Okay, what do I mean by that? Let me be present with this openly, this mood, and try and find it. And whoo, you try and find it, and all, wow, where'd it go? It's right here, but where'd it go? You know, all of this world, this room is right here, but where does it go? Try and find it.
Yeah.
It doesn't go anywhere, but you can't find it.
Right.
You know, it's a matter of acquiring subtlety, of acquiring sensitivity, and being aware of the nuance of what your experience is actually presenting. Our enemy is oversimplifying things. Our enemy is averaging.
Right.
You know, you're presented with a scatter field of infinitely changing infinite data, and you average out a few peaks and valleys, and hold that to be the event.
Right.
But you're ignoring what's actually present, which is.
Right. Yeah.
So it's a matter of developing the sensitivity, the presence, really, the relaxation, to just be with everything that's really happening, and it reveals itself as all of a sudden there's this. You can't say there's too much of it quantitatively. It's too variable and mutable, and you know, in terms of its dynamism, and it's unfindable as anything in terms of its stability or its coherence.
Yeah. So mood turns out to be just too simple.
Yeah, exactly. You look at, but anything. You start with mood. You start with mood and look at what really it is, and it opens. And that opening is the revelation of Shakti.
Right.
Shakti is when you can't find what it is, but it is what it is. Very much, very presently, very obviously. It's very much itself. It's very something. It's very concrete,
Right.
but not as anything whatsoever. Like this is this is obviously concretely present, right? Your experience
Right.
it's in your face. It's like, bang, this is real, and yet you can't find it.
Right.
You know, it sounds insane to try and put it that way, because in terms of human logic, it's nonsensical, but it's self-evidently the fact if you look closely.
Right. You think you can find it, but
Yeah, but that's the fantasy.
really.
And if you settle for fantasy, then you're sitting in a world of stasis and fixed things, and well, not much is going on here. We're just sitting in this living room, and it's kind of an interesting conversation in a way. But maybe I'll go somewhere else and have a beer. But you have to create that simplicity in your imagination, because the reality of your experience in the moment is.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes there's little moments where I notice, hey, this is like really less integrated than I think it is.
Yeah.
This waking thing is
Yeah.
really more
Yeah.
diaphanous than
Yeah.
I'm saying.
Absolutely. And just touch it. Don't try and grab it or cling to it or make sense. Just touch it. When you touch that, just touch it and then let it go. And in the letting go, it may persist or it may vanish, but don't worry about it. Just touch it very gently. Be with this very gently. Be with it presently, but hands off, very, very neutrally,
Right.
with no agenda, with no pushing or pulling on it. If you push and pull on it even slightly, you collapse into fantasy.
Yeah.
Here. Number one, there's a question here from Helen, but I'm not getting your picture anymore.
Well, we're broadcasting as far as I know, so that must be on their end.
There's a lot of people online right now, and it gets overloaded.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I don't know if she'll be able to hear the answer then. I have
Well, we
a
can
question here.
Oh, we'll just ask her. Just
All
ask
right. So the question is, I'm more and more aware of the surroundings as a whole. All the sounds occur in me as if this body is transparent. Sometimes it even feels like all the sound comes from me. Not other people are talking, but the talking is from me. It's very strange. I have no clue what this is. I still don't feel like I am this. Any suggestions?
It doesn't sound to me like you need suggestions. Just be with that and be content not knowing. It's not a matter of trying to turn it into this or find a this or find an I that is this. Just be with this as an openness, as an indeterminacy, as an unknowing. There seems to be sound, and you don't know if it's you or not, and sometimes it seems like this, and sometimes it seems like that, and it never resolves, and that sounds pretty realistic to me. In other words, don't hope to or try to or expect to arrive at some final position. It's rather a matter of letting go of all final positions into indeterminacy, into I don't know.
Okay.
And holding ambiguity, So sounds are coming from within you, fine. They're coming from outside, fine. Why not just, it's inside and it's outside and it's nowhere and it's somewhere, and it doesn't need to be this or that. It can be this and that and the other and nothing and everything, and it can be an uncollapsed quantum condition, or a quantum condition which is randomly collapsing into a bazillion different directions, nonsensically. Having a preconception of what it's supposed to resolve to, what it's supposed to end up at, is dooming yourself to being trapped by chasing a carrot on a string. I say all the time when I use the phrase, this spits off versions of itself. And what I mean by that is, it seems as if it's one way, and simultaneously seems as if it's another way, and simultaneously seems as if it's another way, and so on and so forth. And none of those ways have any coherence or any core. They have no meeting ground, but they don't need to, because the very nature of what it is it just pops out as, it looks like this. It's kind of like that. It's kind of, at the same time, it's kind of like this. And the fact that these versions don't have coherence and don't fit in or make any sense against each other is just how it is. Which again is very counterintuitive in terms of how we are used to approaching it as human beings, because we sort of have this interior logical assumption. Well, there must be some way things are, and if I poke this long enough and investigate long enough, I'm going to find the way things are. It's going to tend to converge on this way, and it'll be verified, and there it'll be sitting, and I go, now I finally got it. But it's not like that. The way things are is not a way. It's no way. And so, but that is the way. The way is a non-way. So not finding a way is finding the way things are. And letting go of expecting it to be a way, which is a very subtle and ingrown thing, so we hold it unconsciously, is the path. This progressive letting go of expecting or needing it to be any particular way. And becoming progressively more and more comfortable with ambiguity, with indeterminacy, with paradox, with having it seem a dozen different ways at once, and having it not make any sense, and not being even the tiniest bit perturbed by that. You're not going crazy. This is crazy. The fantasy of sanity as coherence is a lie.
Right.
True sanity, i.e. engagement with reality, is absolute incoherence, appearing as any degree of coherence. That was a bit of a rant, wasn't it?
Right.
In other words, anything goes.
Yeah, of course. Exactly so. And it's even stronger than that, because it's not even anything. Another way I put it sometimes is, it can appear as anything whatsoever, contradictorily, and yet never depart from itself and never be other than itself.
Helen says, great answer.
Oh, good.
They have a nice crunch, those chips, don't they?
Oh, here's a question from the internet. So I understand that there are no nouns to be found, but why are there not verbs? Isn't it all simply verbing?
Well, you can say that simplistically, but if it was verbs or verbing, you'd need to be able to pin them down and isolate them. In other words, if there was some action, you'd need to find what the action was and what was acting, in some sense, and you can't find that in any sense. You can't even find if there is action. You know, a clear example of this is a dream. In a dream, you can say it looks as if there's all kinds of action, but then when you realize it's a dream and you look at it as a dream, it's like, is anything even happening? There's not any space or objects or situations whatsoever, even though there arguably appears to be. But is anything really happening? So is there any verbs in a dream? Is there any action? You know, even though it looks as though there is, and it's describable as if there is, but those descriptions proves to be completely inaccurate when you see that you're dreaming. So what's happening in a dream, if anything? Well, you know, you can't answer that question. And that non-answer is the event itself. You know, what this is not approachable by characterizing it. It's only approachable as accurately approachable as it itself. So the dream is the answer to the question. What is a dream? The answer is a dream. The dream. The answer is not, oh, it's a this or it's a that or this is happening or that's happening. The answer is a dream, and then look for yourself at the degree to which any of these modes of analyses are accurate. And likewise with this, you know, is there a verb? Well, I don't know, maybe. There seems to be. But when you look closely, can you really find it? Can you really pin it down? I mean, you know, another way of putting that is anything really happening here?
Something's happening here. I don't know what it is.
Yeah. But when you look closely, you know, you can't really answer that question. You can't say it's not. You can't say it is. You know, it's sort of D, none of the above, / you know, C, all of the above. I mean, the only real answer to what's happening here is this. And then whether or not that includes a happening or not, you can leave up to this to answer.
Is the same thing that's happening in a dream as is happening here?
Yes. There's only one reality. And it works only one way. Not in a numerical sense.
Right. But to say that this is a dream is too restrictive.
Well, to say that this is a dream is meaningless because that implies we have some idea what a dream is.
Yeah, right, exactly.
I can say this is the same as a dream.
Right.
I could say this event is exactly the event that a dream is,
Right.
but I can't say what either of them are.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that unsayability is exactly what they are.
But they both work exactly the same way because there's only one thing working.
Always, ever. There's only one thing, and it is what you are. It is this. It is reality. Yeah, and different systems have their particular nomenclature.
Right.
You know, it's the three kayas, or it's the Atman, or it's the, you know, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, or it's the whatever. But
Right.
all of that is irrelevant because it's this right here. It doesn't matter what you call it. You've got the reality. You can look and see for yourself. You don't need to worry about nomenclature.
Well, the internet's really busy today. Helen asks, when the opening occurs, Sometimes it is accompanied by a strong body sensation, as if the energy is radiating. The present awareness seems like to pay more attention to this sensation. What is your advice in this circumstance?
Don't place any particular importance or lack of importance on any symptom. Opening and revelation can provoke and show up in the train of all different sorts of symptoms or not, and these things aren't important in themselves. Because these symptoms are largely a reaction to snapping back and forth between the way you've been holding it and the way a new way of holding it is being revealed, and this provokes a kind of a little twitching thing, which can have all sorts of feeling tone on all sorts of different levels, physically or emotionally or mentally or various different ways. But as you progress more and more, these snappings will tend to be more subtle and less of a and more of a, and then the symptoms will be more subtle. And then ultimately the symptom is ongoing, because what this is a constant this. It's not any one thing, it's a vibration. I mean, it's meaningful to call this because this is an energy event. But none of its states, none of its modes or conditions are final. So you might say it oscillates between infinite different modes as its mode of being. This is maybe getting a little too detailed. It oscillates between different modes in its very mode of being, but none of them are farther along or less far along than any of the others. Although in terms of our opening, we tend to sort of be identified with one mode, and when a new mode reveals itself, it's a whoop, there's a little hiccup there, which is these kinds of symptoms. But ultimately we let go of this because we're flexible enough that we're oscillating in and out of all kinds of modes all the time, and we're comfortable with that, and so there's no not perceptible symptoms or very obvious symptoms of that kind of startlement or something. One way to look at it is this is absolutely unstable in its nature. And when we approach it naively, we approach it in terms of some supposed mode of stability or another. And as the unfoldment progresses, we sort of shift between these different modes of imputed stability. And as we get more mature, we let it be more and more as it is, which is just this flux with no defining characteristics whatsoever. I think maybe I'm talking a bit heavily from my point of view. If any of this doesn't seem to click with anything you can relate to in your experience, that's fine. But feel free to ask or to look at things from your point of view, because that's more important than trying to grasp what I'm talking about if it doesn't particularly seem to make much sense for you.
I have experience of what you talked about, just sort of different modes just appearing, everything You know, not one thing is the same from the next. It could be sound, it could be thought, it could be light. But when I think that I'm sort of, you know, maybe experiencing Shakti, those things are still there. But there's something else, but I don't know what it is.
Sure.
I think Leif, and maybe somebody even on the internet, mentioned something, diaphanous.
Sure.
It is sort of like what's there
Yeah.
is sort of a veil. I mean, that I'm looking through something at all these different modes and everything going on. So it's the fact that that's what makes me sort of not identify with anything in particular, in particular, and what gives me the sense that I just don't know what any one particular thing is. The fact that it's sort of gauzy, that sort of makes everything drop out for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean so I'm not looking at any one object. You
Right.
have to think about what that object is to get back to see it.
Yeah, yeah, and yet the specifics don't go away. One way I would characterize the sensation of Shakti is that there's a moreness. Everything still is exactly what it is, appearing just the same, but then there's something else. There's something
There's just something else there.
It's sort of a little Twilight Zone-y, we're like, wait a minute, there's just something else here.
Yeah.
And you can't even find it, but it doesn't stop or really even affect everything that's going on. But whoa, it's like there's something else there. There's a noticing of there's a moreness.
Yeah.
A moreness that you can't quite pin down.
Yeah. And most of the time, like I say, there is sort of that veil or something. And, there's been other times when this is more unusual, where just everything just shows up one by one, just all bright and everything, and then I really have not an idea. Maybe because of the brightness, I have no idea. I think I told you one time I just all identification dropped away, and then I was trying to. I had the key thing to my car. I was trying to open up my car, and I did that. I just did that just like automatically.
Sure.
But then the fender of the car was all. I've had these kind of things too when I've been high.
Right.
But this was, I wasn't high.
Sure.
And I had to really think. That's the light. That's the fender. Oh, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Then I shifted to something else.
Sure. Yeah.
But the main thing, the more common one, is just what you said. There's something more.
Yeah.
No idea what it is.
Yeah.
But everything else is just occurring.
Yeah, that's great. And in practical terms, just be very loose with this. Don't hold it. Oh, this is better. This is right. This, just sort of be real loose and easy. And here comes this, and here comes that, and isn't that interesting? And
Yeah.
just sort of let it wash through, not particularly even making sense of it, but just but be very present with it. I mean, in the sense, not in the sense of pushing on it, but just in the sense of you really, I'm here. This is happening, whatever it is, and let it be loosely, let it morph, let it go where it wants to go. Our only real problem is trying to hold things as anything, in any way that we do, positively or negatively or in any way whatsoever. And so the training is really one of letting go, one of this letting things be free, letting things morph, letting things be whatever they are or not. Letting them be murky, letting them be distracted, letting just totally just being a clear window and your experience just shines through it.
It's a fun feeling when you can really do that.
It's totally fun. It's entertaining. It's profound. It's meaningful. It's stimulating. It's revelatory. It's vital. It's the life force. It's,
Yeah,
you know,
that's a good word too.
you feel like you're plugged into the real thing. You know, and all that and fun and entertainment. It's like, you know, it's. I mean, who couldn't sell this? If only you could find a way to market it.
Send $5 in SASE to PO Box.
Take no money, don't put it in an envelope. And here it is.
There's not a collection basket on the table in the hallway either.
Not my department.
No.
Thinking of that, I've been sometimes like lying there and focusing on like the noise and things like in vision or sound. Like there's like symphonies of feedback, like like you know, audio kind of feedback in my ears from ringing sounds. Like they're really fascinating and kind of beautiful. And then I focus on them, and then sometimes I'll just lapse into almost like being on drugs or something, like just sort of enjoying it and drifting in it, and it's fun. I don't know if then I'm even really actively like looking at. Sometimes it's more just like sinking into it.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah, you know, the key words, if there were any, would be very present with it, but very, very hands off. Don't try and steer it. And don't even think of it as a looking. Just be present. And when I say by be present, I mean just it's here. You're here. It's here-ness. By presence, I mean here-ness. Not like I need to engage or any kind of. There's nothing dual about it. There's nothing like there's an it and a you.
Right.
Just here. You know, here is. And just be with the here is, and then absolutely not steering, just because the here is will do itself, and it will go where it goes, and you won't even know where it's going or where it is while it's being there. But just be with that, and it will reveal itself as this amazing multi-dimensional thing. And yeah, by all means, trip on it. You know, have fun with it.
Yeah, it's a cheap high.
Yeah, totally. It's the best.
Yeah, it does seem to get bigger and. As I go along, and there's a sense. I guess there's always a sense like it keeps arising that these things are happening and I'm perceiving them.
Sure.
But then that seems to be just another thing. That's arising.
Yeah, just be gentle with that. You don't need to not do that. There's nothing you need to do. Nothing you need to not do. If you're holding it in all sorts of complicated ways, and there's a you, and there's an it, and there's a doing, and all that, just fine. You know, you're just the window that all that's shining through.
Right.
So just be real present with it. And in that presence, it will morph. Even if you're holding it as a strong self and other thing or something, just being neutrally present with that, even that self and other thing will go into something else.
Yeah.
And that's the point, is to be with this, to discover there's no stasis, there's no actual fixed condition, there's just this ongoing, you know, infinite multi-dimensional morphing.
Yeah.
Which is really the point. And that's the Shakti.
Yeah.
It's just that very, you know, dreaminess thing.
Yeah. It's just going in surges and
it does what it does, and just be here.
Yeah.
You know, you're here, it's here, just here-ness, and then it does its thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, have fun with it by all means. I mean, it's endlessly entertaining. You know, it's a win-win. It's entertaining. It's surprising. It's revelatory. It's blissful. You know, it's exciting. It's nourishing. I mean, it's definitely cheap thrills.
It seems to get more interesting because I feel like at first I would have a lot of thoughts of like oh, so what? I'm just gonna sit here and do this forever, or like it would almost feel like I get exhausted or something from being in that state. But then that doesn't seem to happen. It doesn't take on.
But that's a fantasy of needing to follow it or hang on to it. That's a subtle fantasy of holding it or needing to capture it.
I guess that's what's exhausting about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as you become more sophisticated and you learn to just let go into it more and more, it becomes more and more effortless and more perpetual.
Right.
And on the contrary, so far from the sense of it being tiring, it actually becomes nourishing. And you start feeling better and better. It's like a deep sleep. You start feeling better and better and nourished and plugged in and not threatened, and I mean all positive qualities.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems to become more interesting than certain other things too. Like, why would I turn on the television if I could just lie here?
No, I mean
I actually find it's quite good even with the television on.
But ultimately, it's not the opposite of anything. So you get it with. It comes with. There's nothing needs to be excluded. But yeah, I mean that's the whole point. Is just to touch this, to be with this, and it will seduce you. It does all the work. You know. There's no need for spiritual practice. Just touch this, and it pulls you in. It will. It educates you. It's a self-correcting system. Just touch it, and it shows you how to be with it over time, and it reveals. And as it does so, it just becomes endlessly more and more seductive, more and more beautiful, more and more interesting. And so you don't need to think in terms of spiritual effort or spiritual work or needing to achieve. It's just like, give me more, baby. This is great. More, and it obliges. It does. It gives you more. It just keeps
It's kind of like
more.
water going down a sinkhole.
Totally. Yeah. No, the texture of it is exquisite, and just touch that. Just touch that any way you can, and it does the rest. It draws you in. It pulls you in, and it teaches itself. It teaches itself to you. And teaches you to yourself. I mean, it's just a complete opening into intelligence, into reality.
So Peter, here's another question. There are no points of reference that are true, and just noticing it is enough. But is that not another frame of reference? It seems like a loop without a possibility of escape.
Well, and logically it does. I mean, logically you could say it's a point of reference, but it's not actually a point of reference because it is non-referential. You know, let me back up. I'll rephrase it in a slightly different way. Experience is a knowing. And when you're with it as a point of reference, it's a knowing of something, some conditions or circumstances or entities or whatever. But when you're with it non-circumstantially, it's just a knowing of knowing. Experience is knowing experience. Experience is knowing experiencing. So the subject of experience and the object of experience are one. Experience is experiencing experience. So there's arguably a reference in the sense that when a snake's eating its tail, it can say, "Where am I? Oh, I'm on me." You know. So I mean, logically, that's a reference, but it's not a finite reference because it's not definable in any terms because the snake is the whole shebang. The knowing is the whole shebang. So it's not. You know, you could say, yeah, reality is the frame of reference. But that's kind of more in a verbal sense. I mean, literally it is, sure, yeah, by all means call it a frame of reference if you want. It's removing your frame of reference to imaginary partial frames of reference to the one true reference, the one actual existence, which is this miraculous knowing that experience actually is. Yeah, it's a frame of reference. Well, it's not a frame of reference, it's the frame of reference, as opposed to a frame of reference. The mother of all frames of reference. Complete with weapons of mass destruction.
Something else that can't be found.
There's no atheists in foxholes.
So there was a response to your answer. I was hoping for this kind of answer. Thanks.
My pleasure. We aim to please.
You asked about our experience. I find that I can connect with what you're saying when you're saying that.
Mm-hmm. Great.
And it's like a jet stream that I can just jump into, and it's all fine and dandy.
That's great.
But and I think, oh great, you know. But I think that must be it. And then the next day, not so good.
In what sense?
Well, I mean, there's a remembering. Well, the jet stream is what's really interesting because
Right.
it sort of dissipates outside of your presence.
But that's okay.
Yeah.
Because the fact that you can even touch that, the fact that you can tune into that is very powerful. And that fact is with you even if you're not explicitly doing it or actively doing it, you know, in other times or something.
Yeah,
It's something in the background, and that is powerful. Spiritual unfoldment does itself, and most of its activity is in the background. Most of its activity is inherent and not obvious, not particularly explicit. And the fact that you can even follow this, let alone feel like you're really on it, is very powerful. And that indicates that this, you know, this sort of undertow of unfoldment is fully engaged, and that's great. Just rest in that. Even if you feel, you know, some days you might just feel totally out of touch or something, don't worry about it. Just have confidence that it's happening in you. It's like your digestion. It's happening, but you aren't necessarily aware of it all the time. And the signs of it happening is that sometimes it does erupt. Sometimes, you know, you can tune into these kinds of things, or sometimes, you know, spontaneously during the course of your day something will happen and you'll go, oh wow. And the explicit examples of that kind of thing may not be most of the time, or may even seem to be relatively rarely, but that's fine. Don't worry about it. It doesn't matter at all.
Yeah, it seems better with it just happening. I mean, anytime I try to go after it.
Yeah, totally don't force it. I mean, it's about being. It's about letting go. It's not about controlling or trying to steer or trying to, obsess. And as we mature, we spontaneously learn that. We learn a delicacy. We learn a refinement. We learn how to be with ourselves more gently and more sort of trusting, and more and less goal oriented. Just like, hey, whatever's happening, I don't know if it's going anywhere or not, but hey, so what? When I've tried to make it go anywhere, it's not like it's worked or it's done anything. It's not like I've ever gotten any of the goals I wanted, so why should I start now? Why don't we take a little break? So we'll be back in 5 or 10 minutes. I'll shut off the online for a moment. See you shortly. Good.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to very custard.
Uh-oh.
Where you have that? Yeah.
We found it.
No, it won't stay down now.
Shakti lounger.
I mean, this whole jet stream thing that Irma brought up it's very useful, I think, and it's very true. A big part of unfoldment could be described as like discovering new parts of our anatomy. We're discovering whole new modes of function that we didn't know were there, and at first it's very haphazard, but after a while we discover them, and it becomes something we can incorporate in our functionality in ways that we just never even knew existed before. It's maybe roughly analogous to when you're a teenager and you discover sexual functioning. All of a sudden it's like, whoa, what's this? It's like this whole other thing that you didn't even know was a part of you, and all of a sudden there's this whole new mode of functioning that opens up. As one example. But likewise, as in the process of spiritual unfoldment, we find ourselves stumbling into just sort of different ways of holding ourselves, different ways of experiencing, different ways of interacting. And at first it's sort of vague and weird and trippy and exciting maybe, or whatever, or perplexing. But ultimately we incorporate and learn to inhabit these other modes, and they just become a part of ourselves. We discover that we exist in that way as well.
Would you say that, like, for yourself, it has more intensity when, like, we're specifically discussing that, or calling it into mind, or?
It can or not. I mean, it depends. I mean, definitely. I mean, you could say that, not as a rule, but that's occasionally. I mean, sometimes my experience is very dull. I'll be sitting at home or something, and I'll just be sort of sitting there, and I'll pick up a book and wonder if I feel like reading it or not, and sort of spend 5 minutes deciding whether to open it. And there's not like there's any scintillating revelation going on explicitly, like light show or anything. It's just sort of,
It's our teacher.
But that's actually not other than this. Because again, it's not what it looks like, it's what it is. And when you realize what it is, you realize it never departs from what it is, and it doesn't. And at that point, you lose all care about what it looks like. So you can be in the heat of spiritual revelation, and the fireworks are going off, and the Shakti's popping, and psychic phenomena. You're in tune with all the people around you, and it's just amazing, spiritual circus, peak experience. And other times it's like, huh? and the one is in no way better or different than the other.
Yeah.
They're just different ways that this miracle can appear. And what this is not dependent on what it looks like. I mean, that's the real message. That's what we finally get. That's what realization brings. Is the realization that what this is not dependent on what it looks like. And at that point, you let go of needing it or even wanting it to look like one way or another. And you're totally happy with mediocrity. You're totally happy with boredom. You're totally happy with nothing. Or you're totally happy with going out and doing stuff. It just doesn't matter at all, because you know you're not, there's nothing you can gain, there's nothing you can lose in actuality. Yeah. But you don't get that, you don't get the certainty, the fact of that until realization, until you realize what this is. Until then there's a subtle holding of, oh, this is better than that. You know, revelation is better than not. Revelation is great fun, you know. Sitting around in a stupor is great fun. It happens. I mean, you know, probably the most mundane description possible of realization is just contentment. It's okay. And when the fireworks are popping, it's okay, and when it's not, it's okay. It's all good. In just a very simple, matter-of-fact way. Okayness.
I feel like I've been pushed out to see what it is that makes everything the same. It's like going further back, so that you can see reality as just reality instead of the specificity and the nuances and the detail.
Sure.
So at that level, I mean, it's all the same.
Yeah. Sure. That's happened. But then you'll come back to the specificity and the detail and the nuance, and you'll be preaching that on a whole new level of fineness and discover that's also the same. I mean, that's what the process looks like. You know, this pulling back to a bigger view and then zooming into the detail, pulling back and zooming in. And in the process of this kind of kneading, there's an integration that happens. That is an integration of understanding, of seeing more completely on every level. And ultimately seeing that all these different levels and aspects are in no way different than each other. The detail is in no way inferior or superior to the wide view. But the process looks like this kind of kneading, this kind of shifting of perspective, shifting of levels of whatever, shifting of modes, shifting of degrees of rationality. But it functions like a kind of a kneading that's ultimately integrated. In the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus,
Yes.
it says, it ascends from earth to heaven and descends again to earth. And this is referring to this kind of kneading of moving back and forth in perspective to a wide view, a panoramic view, and then coming back into the details and the specificities of things, and this moving back and forth. Because it's not, the simplistic notion of spirituality is just escapism. It's like leaving the specific and going to the general, and bang, all of a sudden everything disappears and it's all just this field of white light and, game over kind of thing. But it's not really like that. You get that, you get the white light and you get the game over, but then you come back to this and see that this is that. And typically it's not just once, but many times back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, which is this process of integration.
So that this gets imbued more with that.
Yes. Or you discover that it is imbued with that.
It is.
But it's another way of putting the same thing, yeah. It feels as if it's getting more imbued, but you're actually just discovering what it actually is and has been all along.
It is that.
Yeah. I mean, another way to put it in escapist terms, it's the solution of the whole escapist problem by discovering there's absolutely nothing to escape from. Because where you would go to escape to turns out to be exactly the same event that is happening what you're trying to escape from. You know, this clear light and radiant bliss and non-self and, you know, heaven realms and all that stuff is exactly the same event as this. All these detail in life and biology and failure and, you know, karma and all that stuff. They're exactly the same event. And when we misunderstand them, we think they're wildly different, and we give anything to get away from this and to get to that. You know, which is a sort of the simplistic spiritual fantasy. But ultimately, it's not true. It's not real.
So in those moments when you can actually escape from this, and it just disappears, and you don't have the burden of this.
Right.
That's just a moment. I mean, for me, it's just a momentary thing.
Sure.
And then it disappears.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Because you can't stay there.
that just,
Its nature is to come into detail. The big's nature is to get small. The small's nature is to get big. You can't stay in either one. So the only place you're going to find a resolution is in both of them.
but that would become more frequent.
Well, it may or may not become more frequent, but it becomes arbitrary and irrelevant. Ultimately, it becomes the point whether you zoomed out or zoomed in is absolutely a non-event because it's the same.
Well, wait, this is different. This is not the zooming. This is the disappear. This is the not being there when everything else is.
Right. But it's the same. But listen,
That's the same thing.
it's the same thing. You're just putting in different terms or in different with different parameters. But it's the same event.
Because that really does feel like freedom. I mean, that's just great.
It is. It's great. No self is great, but self is no self. So you don't need to have a removal of self to have no self. And the greatest freedom is the discovery that self and no self are one, and then there's nothing. Then there's no preferred position, and then you're inviolable. You're invulnerable because wherever you find yourself is perfect, and it's not a problem. I mean, if self is a problem and you find yourself in no self, great. But what do you do when you find yourself in self? You know, you shoot out of luck. But if you discover that no self and self are ultimately identical, then it doesn't matter where you find yourself. Because there's no problem. It's not finding a solution so much as it is the removal of the problem. It's not finding some final condition. It's discovering that there is no condition that you need to get away from.
Peter, it says you're no longer broadcasting.
Well, the computer here thinks I am, so it must be an online problem. Not like they're missing much.
Datafied viewers.
If you refresh this stuff.
So, Peter, in this context, can you say something about volition? This idea that, it's in one sense kind of totally illusory. The idea that you're making a decision or doing something or being an agent in some way or another. But it seems to be kind of the same. Whether you do something or you don't, it's kind of the same.
It's very much the same.
So can you use that to kind of unpack that sense of being an identity behind the volitional doing?
Certainly, because
not be too vague.
No, I think certainly because the most simplistic idea is there's volition, I can do what I want, and blah blah blah. Then a more sophisticated idea is there can't be volition because if I look closely at how volition occurs, it arises from nothing mysteriously. In other words, I don't have a volition to have a volition.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't pre-planned. I haven't chosen to have a choosing. I haven't chosen to have a choosing to have a choosing. Which puts you in infinite regress. So you get to a point where this so-called volition turns out to appear spontaneously and mysteriously. So it's not being intentionally done anyway. So at that intermediate point, you're saying, well, there is no volition.
Right.
So that's a more subtle view than the simplistic view of, sure, I can do what I want. But then a more subtle view still is that, well, what we're calling volition, is not simplistically volition, but it's not volition. So it's something else. It's some mysterious inconceivability, which yet looks very much like what we've always called volition, but what it actually is can't be said. In other words, it's an entry into all modes of functioning without needing to define them or own them or anything. And at that point you can employ any mode. You can use any tool that comes to hand. You can use volition, you can use non-volitionality, you can use self, you can use non-self, you can use all of these modes of of indicating what's happening at your convenience and without being entrapped by any of them. I don't know if that addressed your question.
Yeah.
In other words, don't let the fact that you can't do anything volitionally stop you from doing things volitionally. Because volitionality is not volitionality, it's something else. And the fact that it doesn't exist as volitionality is only a deconstruction, but there's a further letting go of even that into absolute mystery, absolute non-entityness, which is absolutely inclusive. It can be anything. So it's freedom, not being constrained by volition or non-volition. Don't let the fact that you can't do the impossible stop you from doing the impossible. Kind of thing. Empowerment into mystery and magic and irrationality. Or rationality and mundane functioning.
Right. I guess I was thinking more in terms of not letting the fact that you're doing a thing as an illusion prevent you from. I guess I tend to go to the kind of not doing, to
right.
kind of watching it happen.
Yeah.
And being with it, but it seems like there's a subtle way in that still.
Yeah, but that's still holding it to be a certain way.
Holding on that.
When you don't hold it at all, then you're absolutely free to be in any mode. You can be in absolute passive modes, absolute active modes, both and or modes, and then none of the above, and they're all the same. And there's no holds barred, and it's not like there's no stuckness, there's no bias towards or away from any particular mode, because they're all equally indeterminate. They're all equally mysterious and equally unknown and equally, ungraspable. So anything that can happen, and anything that can happen can be spun any number of different ways. And how you spin it, what you call it, doesn't change it in the least. So it doesn't matter. You can say, "Oh, I'm doing this," and you don't need to believe it. But you don't need to not do it because you disbelieve it either. It's just an arbitrary, it's a meaningless designation of a mystery. But again, not holding it, not holding. And when you don't hold, then it will go to any mode that it spontaneously goes to, which may be passive modes, may be active modes, may be unclassifiable modes. But any degree of holding is immature. Any degree of, maintaining any kind of stance, functionally or with regard to your energy, is immature. As we move more and more into maturity, there's more and more just absolute letting go, absolute free spontaneity that can show up as anything. And by its very nature, it tends to be hyper-functional, it tends to be hyper-intelligent, it tends to be hyper-responsive, it tends to be very functional. It's like the less you expect, or the less conditions you have in terms of defining the palette of your responses to a situation, the more free you are to meet it in the moment in any way that is convenient. I guess that's probably analogous to a lot of the sort of Zen martial arts type philosophy of just being here, and then whatever is needed will occur if it can.
Sometimes, when I haven't played a lot of video games, but sometimes I've played ones where there's like, you're in some kind of different world, and it's, there's a free part, there's a really free feeling part at the beginning, like before you know the rules or the objective, or just like checking stuff out. and it feels like there's no right and wrong. Like regarding decision, there's no right and wrong decision because you're doing exploration either way. And sometimes I have a glimpse of that, like a little waking up of that, just walking down the street or something. Like all my ideas about what I'm supposed to be doing, where I'm going, sort of dissolve momentarily. And it feels really freeing, but then it always lapse into having an objective again. But yeah, I was just wondering, like, your take on that. I mean, it seems like that is freedom, like freedom from thinking there's right and wrong decision or objective.
Yeah. You know, when we hold some kind of a template in our imagination, more maybe implicitly or you know, or not particularly comprehensively, some template about what's going on. You know, we typically hold this in our unconscious and aren't even necessarily very aware of it. But it's a way of it's having a sort of a self-image and a worldview of subliminally what's going on here, what matters, and what's, you know, a kind of an inherent bias you're holding in terms of responsiveness, or, you know, what you should be doing, what you ought to be doing, what you want to be doing, and all these various, you know, nuances. And it's like a big game structure. You know, and it's wrong. It's always wrong. It's always erroneous. And moving into reality, moving into realization, is letting go of any explicit game structures entirely. But there is the implicit nature of this, and that becomes the game, so to speak, to the extent there is a game. But it no longer appears in terms of right and wrong or winning or losing or anything like that. It's more a spontaneous responsiveness, a spontaneous engagement that goes where it goes without needing to even. And it is absolute freedom, but it's not a freedom of anarchy or destruction or even purposelessness in a subtle way. But it's not goal-oriented, and it's not restricted by a right or wrong or winning or losing or anything like that. It's more of an intelligence meeting itself functionally in spontaneous real time, improvising always. But it's, you know, it's as much freedom as there is, and it's much more like freedom than these game structures where we hold ourselves and the world to be a certain way.
Right. That makes sense.
It's actually the true freedom, but it's subtle because it doesn't allow deviation from itself. So it's absolutely in conformity with its own nature, but not in a constrained way, in an inherent way.
Right, and it feels like freedom.
Yeah, it's absolute freedom and spontaneity. And yet at the same time it's also absolute identity. Because it is itself.
Right,
That doesn't need to be itself, it just is itself.
Right.
And so it does itself.
Right.
So there's no constraint, there's no rules to be conformed to. There's just the nature which radiates spontaneously, expresses itself. I mean, you know, to put it in really simplistic terms, if you had absolutely no constraints on yourself, what would you do? Well, you would be yourself. You would do whatever you inherently are. And so you would have absolute freedom in the sense that there's no constraint on you, but you wouldn't not be you.
Right.
You would just be you freely.
Right. Yeah, that's how it feels like when those little moments happen. Like, feels like what's happening is happening because it's nature to do that, and it feels free at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's unconstrained. There's nothing external or artificial it needs to conform to or comply with.
Mm-hmm.
So what are we doing when we're being ourselves and we're not being free being ourselves? I mean, what are we adding to that?
Well, first of all, you're being yourself, being free to be yourself, but you're being free to be yourself on a relatively immature level,
Yeah.
which is appropriate because that means you are on an immature level, relatively. And
That again.
Speak freely.
huh?
Speak freely.
Well, one is present company excluded, of course, accepted. One is always free to be what one is. You know, an infant is free to be an infant. It's not free to be anything other than an infant until it stops being an infant. And likewise, when we are behaving or functioning in a relatively more spiritually mature mode, then we are freely and unconstrainedly being what we are, which happens to be resonating in that mode of functionality. And then as we mature, in terms of, in a spiritual sense of unfoldment or something, then we are free to move into those modes that we are moving into.
Right, we're trying to be more than we are.
Yeah, but I mean, how silly is that? How can you be more than you are? But on the other hand, you don't know what you are, so it doesn't necessarily hurt to try. But to pretend to be other than you are is the height of folly. But to experiment, subtly different. And it is by experimentation that the discovery of superior, let's call them superior or more mature spiritual modes is made. By trying it, by saying, wait a minute, what's going on over there? And then you go into that, you pay more attention to that portion of your experience, and then you discover something maybe, and you kind of get to inhabit it or own it or function in whatever implicit modes it seems to include. Which is very different from sort of fantasy, which a lot of modern spirituality consists of,
Or pushing yourself to
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, it depends. Pushing yourself, it can be something different than experimenting. Pushing yourself can be fantasizing. It can be holding yourself in a stance of aspiration, which is not really making the move, but holding yourself as wanting to. I aspire to know God. I want to know God. I'm going to spend the rest of my life wanting to know God. I think a lot of devotees, bhakti type people do that. Sort of holding themselves in a mode of aspiration, which is basically egoism, perhaps, because it's a kind of a self-aggrandizement or finding a self-identity as someone with this altruism. Instead of really experimenting and moving into the altruism. You don't need altruism in reality. Altruism is a wanting or a holding or a positioning in relation to something that you hope to grow into or embody, or that you hope to value, or that you do value, but you somehow don't embody. When you embody it, you don't need to be altruistic about it. You just are it.
So Peter, what about, it seems that there are certain resonant modes that just keep coming up more and more strongly.
Mm-hmm.
They're sort of like, there's the furniture in the house, and there are pictures on the wall, and then there are the main beams that seem to be, set in stone,
Mm-hmm.
that don't seem to move at all,
Mm-hmm.
even though, investigation shows that they don't really exist.
Mm-hmm.
But nevertheless, I catch myself just kind of turning suddenly, and there they are.
Mm-hmm. Well, as always, if you are present with anything, it will reveal itself as more than you're used to holding it as being. Which isn't to say that it needs to change, it needs to go away.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like simplistically we may interpret the fact that our lives seem to have patterning as a kind of a stuckness. Oh, I'm stuck in my karma, I'm doomed, and this is never going to change. But then when we develop a more subtle understanding, we look at these phenomena, we discover, no, there's more going on here than I'm noticing. It looks the way it looks, but in the first place it actually looks different than the way it looks, because there's a whole lot of ways it looks that I'm not including in the way I'm usually designating what it looks like.
Yeah.
And then if I look at even that more closely, it opens up into even more and more and more. And so the stuckness vanishes by being revealed as being a vast panorama of inconceivable qualities that are not resolvable into anything coherent that you could possibly be stuck in.
Mm-hmm.
And yet that doesn't mean it's necessarily going to look, it needs to look different than it does.
Mm-hmm.
See, that's the fallacy that, to be freedom, then that means everything is just going to change into, just sort of, pillows or fog or clouds or something.
I think that just that it's not even that I expect them to change, but it's just that this same apparent resonance is coming up again and again.
Yeah.
That it has my attention.
Right.
Then I kind of keep looking.
Right.
In terms of like from a different angle.
Yeah.
From like that.
Yeah, but that's good. It's not, and it's not that it keeps coming up. It's how you're holding, what you're holding it to be, and how you're holding yourself in relationship to it. And when you stop holding it to be anything, and you stop feeling like you need to hold yourself in any particular relationship to it, then it dissipates. It becomes irrelevant, whether or not it seems to keep being there. I mean, the nature of some of our lives, the nature of the way the energy works in our lives, for some people in their karma, there seems to be a lot of sort of apparent repetition or apparent sort of semi-consistency where things don't seem to change very much, from one point of view. But you can be stuck in that or absolutely free within that, depending upon how you're holding it and what you're holding yourself to be, and how you're holding yourself in relationship to it. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to disappear or wildly morph or something. And that's the fallacy. That it even needs to. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what it looks like. It's what it is that counts.
Yeah.
And what it is profoundly more than it looks like superficially.
Right.
And yet that moreness is completely available and accessible. It's not necessarily mysterious. It's not some moreness we need to take on faith. If we look at anything that's in our lives, it will obviously and explicitly reveal itself as inconceivable.
Right.
But it won't necessarily change.
Yeah.
It might, but it might not.
No, I was just saying that actually that's reality. that thing, you know, just entertaining the notion that that could be reality actually,
Yeah.
rather than me like trying to get rid of this thing. That's the thing that's actually got me moving in the direction of reality.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
It always. There's always nothing but reality present.
Mm-hmm.
Unreality is never actually present.
Right.
The only question is, since it is reality that's present, it's also infinite and open-ended, i.e. inherently unstuck and unentrapping, which is the important point.
Mm-hmm.
So you discovered that it's an infinite field of light, and you are that infinite field of light, and at that point it's irrelevant what it happens to look like.
Right.
Even if it looks like the same old, it doesn't matter at that point.
Yeah.
Because it's not you in your life stuck, it's an infinite field of light. It happens to look as if it might be interpreted as being you in your life stuck.
Yeah.
But you know for a fact it isn't, so it's irrelevant.
Yeah. No, I've been seeing a lot more lately. It's sort of like looking at things from the complete other side,
Mm-hmm.
where I see that the very things that I see are the result of circumstance are actually the things that brought the circumstance.
Yeah, sure, yeah. There's a lot of subtlety and a lot of angles to it. You know, and none of these different ways of seeing it are actually final.
No.
But they're empowering
They're
and
just different
freeing.
angles to
Yeah.
give you a sense of.
But they're empowering and freeing because they reveal that there's more going on than you may be used to holding it as being.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, the whole thing with resonant modes is not that they're problems. The thing with resonant modes isn't to get rid of them. The thing with resonant modes is to see that they are resonant modes of Shakti.
Mm. Yes.
And then it doesn't matter that they're resonant modes because they're resonant modes of Shakti.
Yeah.
You don't need to stop, you don't need to get rid of the dream, you just need to see that it is a dream. And all of a sudden you're not trapped by it because it's just a dream.
Right.
But you don't need to, it's not like you need to make it disappear.
Yeah.
And resonant modes are just like that. Resonant modes are ways that things seem to be, in any sense. And it's not like we need to have things stop seeming to be anything.
Right.
We don't need to go to like plain vanilla, blank screen. We just need to see that we are just seeing things as being this way, but that doesn't mean that they are that way in any limited sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's like open-endedness appearing as this.
Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking that when we were kids, we used to go to the city for holidays, and then, you know, we didn't know where we were. We were just in the car driving, and then we got to know these landmarks,
Right.
you know, that you would look for. You would look like, oh, there's the so-and-so.
Yeah, in fact, it's kind of a familiarity.
Yeah, so that was sort of gave us a sense of knowing where we were, or how to get from A to B.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
like if you went to this corner and that landmark
Right,
is
right,
there,
right.
and then, you know,
Right.
it's, and you know, in a sense, the resonant modes that appear to be emerging again and again could foreseeably be landmarks of
Yeah,
reality that are.
sure. They are landmarks, but again, they are open-ended landmarks. It's a lot like it's a lot like as constellations in the sky.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, well, there's the Big Dipper, and there's Orion, and there's the North Star, and the Big Dipper isn't even the Big Dipper. It's just stars in space.
Right. But if you.
But it looks but the resonant mode is, oh, it's the Big Dipper.
Right.
But that's not in any way entrapping. It doesn't stop it from being just stars in space.
Yeah.
And likewise, this, the actual open-ended free flow of our lives looks as if it is these relative constellations that tend to appear with some regularity. But the fact that it appears that way doesn't mean that it's limited to being that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the empowering noticing, is to notice that just because it appears this way doesn't mean it is in any way limited to that,
Mm-hmm.
and hence in no way entrapping as that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's subtle, we have to be with this to really get the nuance of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Well, and sometimes we have to become aware of these things in order to even
oh yeah,
investigate. And I just notice that there are certain things that you know, they're sort of in my peripheral vision, and they appear again and again. And
Yeah.
I have a tendency to kind of pretend they're not there, or
Right.
justify or block out or whatever,
Yeah.
rather than to actually turn and go, okay,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. But yeah, that's an old mode. But again, it's kind of denial and that kind of thing is a way of giving them power.
Mhm.
And actually being with them, being open to them, being present with them, makes them open and actually frees you from them.
Right.
Without removing them necessarily or rejecting them, but incorporates them into your fullness.
Mm.
I mean, basically holding things at a distance makes them stuck, makes them solid. And being intimate with anything gives it freedom, allows it to open, gives it vitality, gives it unstuckness. So when you embrace your life, when you're most intimate with your life, is when your life opens up and becomes the most vital and the least entrapping. You know, when we hold our life at arm's distance, or any aspect of it, is when it gets clamps down and gets stuck and gets threatening and becomes problematic. The way out is through, not by backing up, but by going through. You might say simplicity.
Phrase that usually perks up your attention, which is when you see what this is, which is I'm wondering if you're talking about seeing this more and more as all Shakti in the same way.
Well, you can't define what it is. See what this is means to see what this is. And it is partially describable as all being Shakti, but that's not what it is. That's just a partial description. It is itself. It is what it is. Can't be said what that is. But anywhere you look, that is what is to be seen. In other words, it doesn't matter what your starting point is of what you look at. When you look and see what's there, you will see reality, ultimately, because that is what is there. And if that consists of the omnipresence of Shakti, then that's what it will be. But that's only one way of describing what it is. It is itself, and it can't be captured in. Well, it can't be captured in words. If that may be true, but if that's true, the words aren't true. The fact is true, and when you see what this is, if that's the fact, then that'll be the fact. I mean, we can characterize all different sorts of aspects about it, which we do all the time in these talks, but none of them are true in themselves or finally. They're all sort of indicators, partial indicators or approximate indicators of something that is exactly itself and doesn't conform to any description. In other words, if you summed up all the little buzzwords and phrases that occurs in these talks about, well, it's the presence of Shakti, it's absolute indeterminacy and absolute specificity as a unity, it's this, it's all these various sort of little pseudo definitions of what it is. If you took them all up and made them into a list, it still wouldn't be particularly coherent, and it wouldn't even really accurately describe it. Those are more indicators of where to look than definitions. And when you look, you'll find something other than the indicators, or let's say more than the indicators, that is unindicatable. So that's why calling it what this is actually a more accurate way to put it. Because it's itself. And to some degree it conforms to these approximate references to it, but it doesn't really. It's like if you describe to a teenager what adulthood is like. You can probably say a lot of profound things about what it's like, but if you took them all and summed them up into a manifesto or a paragraph or something, it wouldn't be what adulthood really is like. It would just be partial indications of aspects of what it's kind of like. You don't know what it's like until you experience it. Because it's the experience, and experience is open-ended. Experience is not translatable into idea. So see what this is kind of hits the nail on the head. It's like a teenager asked me what adulthood's like. I said, well, when you see what this is, that's what it's like. And then you'll know what it's like.
I thought it had to do with what we call awakening, as if there is.
Well, it does. Seeing what this is exactly identical with awakening, so-called.
Wake up.
All dimensions, I'm working on it. I've been awake for over 20 hours.
And counting. Yeah, see what this is, and awakening and realization are all one and the same thing.
It's funny that the interpretation doesn't stop or really need to stop, but its movement continues to create a proliferation of a hallucination of an insufficiency or a not yet, or I haven't arrived, or this isn't it, or whatever it's doing in 1,000 moments. But it only does it right here, right now, in this creative instant.
Yeah.
So it can collapse, and does instantaneously. It requires some kind of calorie to be believed in.
Yeah. In the context of infinite freedom and indefinability, these definitions spit out and imply limitedness and stuckness.
Amazing. And defended and asserted as if, I've been around before this moment, and then I have a bunch of history to rely on to convince myself and you of my, of the insufficiency and my lack of entitlement that this should be other than free. It's like mind-boggling.
It is truly mind-boggling.
Mind-boggling. And it's not that needs to stop. It doesn't have any value whether it stops or continues. It's purely this most deeply subtle thing, which is, we call it identification with, or the belief in that arising.
Yeah.
That creates the surging forth of a persona that's other than this.
And as a dilemma, it doesn't need to be solved. It doesn't need, or stopped. It doesn't need to be seen. And the seeing is sufficient, because then it ceases to exist as a problem and exists only as a curiosity. I mean, the inherent intelligence never-endingly spits out interpretations of itself.
Yeah.
Never-endingly. It just spits out these narrations and these labels and these versions of itself that are always partial and non-comprehensive.
But what's funny, we could say that as so-called thought or the inherent intelligence is doing that, earlier on in the conversation we could say that that's always late. But it's not late. It's just as present. It's as present with itself as everything and anything can possibly or is.
Yeah, that's one of its major real-time modes. For sure,
That's really funny. Because you could say, oh, well, I'm thinking and I'm believing in thoughts and they're always late. No, they're not. It's happening right now. Nothing's late. How could it be?
Yeah, that they're late is another thought and another belief and identification.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah.
Sleight of hand, sleight of mind.
Incredibly beautiful sleight of mind.
Yeah.
But it's the core of entitification of the parent existence of an entity that's in some form or forms of disillusionment or withoutness or risk. And then it wants to know about itself, or it wants to cure itself. And then you're toast.
Define yourself into existence and then solve the problem
That's right.
of your
Define
existence.
yourself into existence, and then you insist on curing yourself. Good luck. Best of luck.
Well, it's just about quitting time. So that's a kind of a nice high point / weird point to leave on. With a good night online if there's anyone left. Any hardcore stragglers.